I welcome Dr. Rahul Jain. She is going to speak today on diabetes complications. And this is going to be great lectures for all the specialists in our specialty, the people who are general physicians. He had taken it diabetes overview. Then he had taken management focus was there again yesterday. And today he's going to tell about the complications part of it. So let's over to you, Dr. Rahul Jain.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning, all. First, just before starting complications, I will just finish up the lecture with few more things about the treatment. So, we discussed so many things about the treatment, that what drug is to be given in what conditions, what drug is not to be given in which conditions. There is one more concept called as HbA1c reduction number. Means that every drug, there is a maximum percentage that it can reduce HbA1c by. Suppose when I give metformin, it has been shown in the study that metformin can only reduce HbA1c by 1 to 2%. Okay. Which means that if someone's HbA1c at that moment is 10 and our target is 7, how much ever metformin we give, it won't come to normal.
Perfect. Good.
And this number for metformin and sulfonylureas, the drugs glimepiride and glyburide, chlorpropamide, tolbutamide, these drugs, they both have the number, both have capability of reducing HbA1c by 1 to 2% only. But when we come to the drugs like incretins, which we spoke about, that they are the highlight of today's diabetic scenario, and they are the excellent drugs, do not cause hypoglycemia. The incretins, the GLP-1 agonists, the DPP-4 inhibitors. So there is a point that it can only reduce HbA1c by 0.9 to 1%. So it is only for the people who are in the who we detect early, like maximum HbA1c 8 or controlled with metformin, but not but around 8.
Okay.
So yes, so if it's beyond 8 to 9, then it's preferable to go for sulfonylureas, even though their side effect is hypoglycemia, but then sugar control is absolute need is important.
I want to be clear
then,
again.
Above 10, we always go for.
If HbA1c is more than 8, then they should start insulin with sulfonylurea?
No. If HbA1c, first of all, if we're talking about a person who has come first time, so HbA1c more than 10, directly we start with insulin therapy to control them. Then over the months, when HbA1c reduces, we can change their needs of their medications or insulin. Then if at the time of first detection it was 9 to 10, then we directly go for dual therapy, as guidelines say. So if now the question is what to do if the HbA1c is less than 9. So first of all, if it is the person coming first time to you, then we will just go with metformin and diabetic diet and all the lifestyle changes, and then we will see the progression. So even after 3 months, the HbA1c has not achieved the target. Suppose it is 8, then the second, or 9, then with the second drug. So suppose it is 8, then we just need to reduce the HbA1c by 1%. That time we can go for incretins. But if HbA1c persists to be 9%, then preferable to add sulfonylureas. Because they reduce HbA1c by 2%.
वो मैं prescription में लिख दूँगी, आज मुझे ले लिया.
Then yes, then let's go to some new advances. So new advances are first of all insulin pumps. So yes, so in modern times, this new entity has come, insulin pumps. It is a pump which will be fitted inside the body, and it will keep releasing insulin according to the sugar levels in the body, glucose levels in the body. So it basically acts like artificial pancreas without exocrine functions. Even though artificial pancreas is the best, transplantation is the best, but this is much safer, and there is no need for immunosuppression after putting this insulin pump. Within 3-4 years, it will be introduced in India also. As of now, it is not available in India, but in foreign countries, it is being tried on. Then another new advance I would like to speak is fructosamine assay. So when we speak of HbA1c, it is based on glycosylated hemoglobin, and hemoglobin average life is, the RBC's average life is 90 to 120 days. So it is based on that fact that it gives us the level of last 3 months. So 90 days, if we take average of 100 days, the HbA1c gives us level of average glucose levels in the body for last 100 days. But what if someone has underwent trauma in last 100 days, or has given blood in last 100 days, or even has some blood disorder? Then HbA1c is not a reliable parameter. Then we should check fructosamine assay, which is glycosylated albumin. So albumin also in our body gets glycosylated, and this fructosamine assay, it gives only sugar levels for last 2 weeks. So if we just want to check someone's 2 weeks last assay, or if someone has any blood problem, then also it is preferable rather than going for HbA1c.
What is the cost?
Then I'm not aware of the cost.
Is it available in India?
Yes.
Okay. I'll find it out.
Then, yes. Then continuous blood glucose monitoring has been brought up by a board for type 1 diabetes mellitus, which need very strict control in their insulin dose moderations from one dose to another dose. So yes, they just fit a sensor like this in the arm, and then every 24 hours the person just puts the machine over the sensor and records the last 24 hours sugar values. I would like to highlight one more point, that the glucometer we use in the home is more reliable than this continuous glucose blood monitoring. But yes, it gives a good average idea.
Okay.
So even for those people who have this fitted sensor, we should not trust these values at first point. We should always recheck if they complain of hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia and have come to hospital.
I will tell you my brother's experience. Repeated pricks he does not like. Okay? So if you tell him that, you have to monitor yourself 5-6 times a day, he does not like. So in such cases, I think probably the sensor and all will be more effective, because people get irritated by their monitor. Why they get irritated, we do not know.
Yes. Then just few case studies I've incorporated so that we just summarize the whole thing and we just get a gist of it. So suppose a 45-year-old male, known case of hypertension since 10 years, well controlled on telmisartan and hydrochlorothiazide, taking only once a day, and now has come with elevated HbA1c 8%, fasting 110 and postprandial 1. It is detected first time. So he has not been diabetic before, and now he has come first time. So what treatment patient should be started on? So as we already discussed, the first drug is always to be started metformin, and also he does not have any contraindications like any kidney disease and all. So we will start him on a metformin, maybe 500 mg BD regimen, and we will see how is the response, and we will advise him to reduce his weight and other factors. And also, yes, one more point, it will come later, that for hypertensives and people who have kidney disease, the guidelines, the target guidelines for blood pressure are 80 to 140 when we are controlling target guidelines in diabetes for blood pressure.
140 and diastolic, how much?
140/80 only. Normally, the targets we studied yesterday for 140/80 for normal population. If they have diabetes, the 140/85 it is written. But in case of chronic kidney disease or anyone which has kidney disease, the guidelines are stricter, and we ask them to reduce their BP. The target is 130/80.
138.
Because yes, we will study about it in complications, the reason behind it.
All right.
Then second case, that this person is there with again history of hypertension, type 2 diabetes mellitus since 10 years, and suffered a ischemic stroke involving right side of the body 5 years back, and now on regular medications for stroke, ecosprin, atorvastatin, multivitamins, and for hypertension he's taking losartan and hydrochloroquine, and already a diabetic so taking metformin BD, and now has come with HbA1c of 7.8, so it is again mildly elevated. So now what is the ideal treatment? So as we know that we have to add on another therapy because his sugars are not controlled, and also hyperglycemia is a risk factor for recurring strokes and other things, and he's already a vascular disease patient, so we need to control it. So next step, so we studied what are the preferable drugs. So for stroke patients, the next preferable drug will be pioglitazone or rosiglitazone.
Okay.
So next drug should be added is Pioglit, it comes as. We should add that drug and then we should see the response.
Okay.
Then last, I just like to add this point. Dr. Ramesh, he's a surgeon by profession. He's 65 years old. He has diabetes since 3 years and he's taking metformin only and now has high HbA1c. So obviously what extra drug we would like to add? So yeah, at this point, I think it's preferable that we can add one GLP-1 or DPP-4. There's a reason behind it. So we should always see a patient's profession before prescribing any drug. So he's a surgeon, which means he'll have erratic food ingestion timings. So he won't eat food at a regular timings. He might be busy in surgery. He will have long hours in night. So we should always give them a drug that's not called hypoglycemia. Because even during surgery, if the patient suffers, if the surgeon suffers hypoglycemia, it's obviously grave for his own himself and also for the patient he's operating on. So good. Yes, we should always see these things. So moving on to complication of diabetes mellitus, which will be
the metformin.
Yes, ma'am.
ये जो सर्जन अभी तक मेटफॉर्मिन ले रहा था, अब इसको मेटफॉर्मिन हटा के सारे इंक्रेटिन्स ले.
Metformin will get continued. He will keep taking metformin. Metformin we won't stop.
Okay.
Metformin does not cause hypoglycemia and they are excellent drugs and they are insulin sensitizer. They should always be given.
Good.
Then let's go to the last topic, this complications. So yes, so diabetes has many.
1 minute, Rahul. So Rahul is going to now speak to you. Rahul is now going to speak to you on the complication of diabetes. He's finished with treatment. Now he's going to speak to you on the complication of diabetes. Over to you, Rahul Jain.
Yes, diabetes as a disease is not that debilitating, but the complications are very hard to manage, and obviously they're very debilitating for the patient. So it has many complications. There are acute complications which happens immediately over the span of few days to few hours, and there are few complications which takes years to develop. So first, few acute complications are 4. So there is diabetic ketoacidosis, there is hyperosmolar hyperglycemia, lactic acidosis, and hypoglycemia. So yes, one thing I would like to add is diabetic ketoacidosis is most important, and it normally occurs in type 1 diabetics and even in late stages of type 2 diabetics. So now there is some criteria for diabetic ketoacidosis. This criteria, how we remember it. So the name says everything. So the name is diabetic ketoacidosis. So diabetic. The word diabetic signifies increased blood sugars. So the blood sugar should be more than
250.
The word keto signifies urinary ketones. And last is acidosis. The arterial blood gas should show a pH of less than 7.35. So it's showing patient is in acidosis. So the criteria is very simple. That is, it has 3 criteria. So just go with the words. So diabetic means increased sugars, keto means increased ketones, and acidosis means decreased blood pH. So if patient satisfies all 3 criteria, we diagnose him with diabetic ketoacidosis. So many times it happens that a patient has presented with diabetic ketoacidosis and he's being well managed, but it is always to be remembered that there is always a precipitating factor for diabetic ketoacidosis. That precipitating factor can be anything, even a new pregnancy can cause diabetic ketoacidosis, any stress on the body, even any stroke, and many times what happens is these people, diabetics, long diabetics, long history of diabetics have autonomic neuropathy, and and they will suffer silent myocardial infarctions. They will get myocardial infarction, they will survive it, and no one will get to know also. They will not even suffer any chest pain because nerves will get damaged over the course of the illness. Then, so we should always look for precipitating factors. So there is a specific management for DKA, but we should always send many investigations along with it to control the precipitating factor and to detect it. So it can be MI, it can be a stroke, it can be infection. In my practice and in how much ever I've worked in hospital, I have seen it's mostly a low respiratory. So again, chest X-ray becomes important. Then UTI can also cause diabetic ketoacidosis. So yes, looking for a precipitating factor is a must, and we should not miss out that point. And then yes, diabetic ketoacidosis is associated with grave complication of hypokalemia and even hyperkalemia. So both should be managed accordingly. And main ultimate treatment is IV fluids and management of potassium, and then we later control sugars. But first, this thing is IV fluids and potassium. And basically, how it happens is that if there is no insulin, the blood sugar is in the blood, but it can't go inside the cell. So cell is deficient of energy. So what it does is it falsely thinks that there is no sugar in the blood, and it will elevate sugar more. Along with the sugar, the other hormones which are increasing that glucose will also cause lipolysis. That is breakdown of all the fatty acids. That fatty acids ultimately forms ketones, and those ketones have acidic property. That's why the blood pH also falls, and they cause major problems. So yes, this was about the mechanism of treatment and the always look for precipitating factor. This is a golden point in diabetic ketoacidosis. If I come to hyperosmolar hyperglycemic state, it is just like a brother of diabetic ketoacidosis, but it has a very bad prognosis. The reason is it usually occurs in, first of all, elderly population, type 2 diabetic mellitus. The sugar levels are more than 600 to 900, sometimes more than 1200 also. 1200 mg per deciliter sugar levels, and they usually occur in very debilitated elderly, like they will be on the bed. No one would have given them water for 10 days. They become dehydrated. 10 days means like they'll be taking a mild just to survive type of water, but they'll be dehydrated chronically. Then suddenly they will go in hyperglycemia. That will obviously cause osmotic diuresis. So again, the major problem in hyperosmolar hyperglycemic state is dehydration. Even in DKA, dehydration has the diabetics should always maintain their water levels properly. They should make sure their water intake is at least 2 liters a day minimum.
Okay.
Because obviously there's diuresis also. So hyperosmolar hyperglycemic state has a very bad prognosis, and also there will be associated bed sores because it occurs in elderly individual. Yes, then the treatment is moreover based on the same lines of DKA, that is fluids, insulin, and watching for hypo and hyperkalemia. And yes, last and important is hypoglycemia, as we had already discussed the symptoms before also. So yes, one more important I would like to highlight is in a neonate or in an infant, when do we call hypoglycemia? The levels are less than 45 mg per deciliter, we call it hypoglycemia. But for adults, it's not like that. So normally, even the values lesser than 70, we say the patient is going in hypoglycemia, and clinical features start occurring when the patient goes below 60. But if someone has diabetes since long, and their average sugar levels are always like 200 or maybe 210, 180, even sugar levels, and that is high, but not enough that it causes much of the symptoms in that hyperglycemic patient. So for those people, even values less than 80 will be considered hypoglycemia because their average sugar levels are way higher. So yes, let's moving on to micro complications next. And before going to micro complications and that chronic complications, this is very interesting. I would like to mention here the mechanism of those complications in a very simplified manner. I've tried to make it as simple as possible. Yes. So we need to remember that basically there are macro complications and micro complications. So in layman terms, the macro complication means the complications related to the major vessels. So basically they're related to the blocking of those vessels, which causes ischemia and death of the tissue, and that causes specific symptoms. So those macro complications are because of these advanced glycation end products, while the micro complications are because of pericyte necrosis. So these are the two golden words. Let's go on to first why the micro complications.
Micro is because of?
Micro is because of pericyte necrosis and neoangiogenesis. I will explain it more. So micro complication basically is a complication because in very thin capillaries and very thin arterioles just at the end where they're terminating in the tissues. So the tissues which have very small capillaries and small arterioles are affected the most. So now comes the point, what are those tissues which get affected the most? So if we're talking about micro complications, first is obviously kidney. Kidney has, at the level of nephron, it has very thin capillaries and arterioles. Then your retina. Our retinopathy, it's the earliest micro complication related to diabetes. And then there is neuropathy. The neurons have very small vessels called as vasa nervorum. They get affected. So yes, how it happens is, let's see this. Let's just see this figure. The figure has, I've shown even macro and micro. I'll discuss first micro. So if we look lower down, here's red vessels shown in the bottom, and along with it, one blue cell hugging that vessel is shown. That blue cell is pericyte. So normally body, they are lined by endothelium. This is normal physiology, and along with them, there's always a pericyte hugging them along with the vessel. So what is the normal function of this pericyte is, it maintains the stability of this endothelial cell, and it also stabilizes the vessel. So whenever there is lot of very high sugars, it causes this pericyte necrosis. So this pericyte dies. So the moment this pericyte dies, obviously, normally wherever any damage occurs in our body, an endothelium will also die. It will try to regenerate its vessels. So whenever there is inflammation and whenever these new vessels are very leaky and incompetent, because obviously they are new vessels, and new angiogenesis occurs, and new angiogenesis, if we break it, it's the new vessel formation, and it is because of VEGF and TGF beta hormones, the local inflammatory mediators basically. So these VEGF and TGF beta are released from all the endothelial injury, and they are causing production of new vessels. Those new vessels are very leaky. So since they are leaky, all the products which are coming in the blood will get leaked around that area. So ultimately it starts as very well causing pericyte necrosis. Then the vessel will try to regenerate, but then it won't be able to regenerate because again pericyte will keep dying, and there is new angiogenesis. Those vessels are leaky and will cause all the trouble. So this diagram, we should remember that there's a red vessel along with pericyte, and pericyte normal function is to stabilize, but since it will keep dying, it will not able to regenerate well. There is so yes. So why we can see it in retina first. So before we say that the earliest symptom of micro complications setting in are diabetic retinopathy. The reason is diabetic retinopathy, where we can directly see micro vessels from own eyes. If we say, can we see someone's kidney small vessels? Unless we do a biopsy, we cannot. But in the case of eyes, we can just put a fundoscope and we can directly see those vessels into the directly see the retina, and we can see the changes. So even which is asymptomatic in the beginning, will start having these changes and we can detect it there. So yes, that's why we should always get a type 2 diabetic mellitus patient's fundoscopy done, so that we know they are at which stage of their microvascular complication. And if we detect it early, he can still control his blood sugar, and we can prevent many complications, and which a grave complication of diabetic nephropathy, which is so debilitating.
Correct.
So this was about the microvascular complication. I think it's clear about how does microvascular complications moreover happens.
Clear.
Yes. So next, I'll go next to macrovascular complications. So yes, yeah, so before I go to actual structure, that in macrovascular complications, normally when we are saying we are seeing a vessel, we have something as fatty streaks. So they are present in everyone. Even a neonate will have, even an infant will have, even an elderly will have. But with age, they keep increasing it in number. So that is physiological. They're called as fatty streaks. So the moment fatty streaks are there, those fatty streaks are just streaks, nothing else. So, but due to high glucose levels in the blood, this thing called as advanced glycation end products, that is AGEs, they get formed into the cell and they cause cross-linking of extracellular matrix proteins. And along with the patient also has hypertension, they will cause injury of the endothelium. So yes, that's where the concept of controlling all the risk factors comes. So, and also patients of diabetes will have hyperlipidemia. So again, so basically all the risk factors get assimilated at this level. So what actually happens? So first of all, there's high sugar. Those fatty streaks are like precursor molecules where all these things can occur inside the vessels. So basically they form a stress atheroma inside the vessel. That atheroma will have a fibrous cap, will have a lipid-rich core, and will have a base. So now this is a point we need to understand, that atheroma is also of two types. There is an atheroma which is a stable atheroma, and there is an atheroma which is a vulnerable atheroma. So now what decides this atheroma as a stable atheroma or a vulnerable atheroma is that what is the size of fibrous cap and what is the type of lipid center. So if someone has high sugar and someone has hypertension, they will develop atheroma. But along with it, someone has high lipids, they will develop a vulnerable. But if someone does not have high lipid levels, they will not develop a vulnerable atheroma. Instead, they will develop a stable atheroma with less of the lipid center and thick of the fibrous cap. So if we read about cardiological pathology and physiology, the stable atheroma doesn't cause much of the problem. It just causes narrowing, and it does not cause much of the problem. The major problem is vulnerable atheroma because it can rupture at any time and cause complete obstruction. And those patients only we get all the major complications like multiple myocardial infarction, stroke, or even in peripheral vascular diseases, gangrene, diabetic foot, diabetic ulcer, and all those things. So I hope both the
yes, yes. It means the lipid जो है ना आपको lipid profile ठीक करनी पड़ेगी.
Yes. So then now we have covered the complications mechanism. I will just like to add what are the complications, and I'll tell something more about them. So macro complications we have already covered, that how they happen and why are they happening. So atherosclerosis, MI, gangrene. So the mechanism is very simple, that there is a basement membrane thickening because of advanced glycation end products, which is causing and also the associated injury because of hypertension, and that will trap the LDL in, and then it will keep growing and growing, and then there's a formation of this full atheroma. This atheroma is a cause of major trouble, and we need to see the vulnerable atheroma or the stable atheroma. Even if it has occurred, we will try to prevent it happening. But it has occurred, then we need to make sure it's a stable atheroma or vulnerable atheroma. Then and we need to prescribe drugs also if someone has occurred. If these things have occurred, prevent the progression of atheroma. Then next, coming to micro complications. So these microvascular complications occur at all the places wherever there are microvessels. So nephropathy, yes, this is one point I'd like to add is how to detect nephropathy in the stage with debilitating kidney or the patient can, and it is reversible. How to detect that? There is something called as detection of microalbuminuria. So if a patient, we get urine routine done and the patient excretes microalbuminuria. Now what is this terminology of microalbuminuria? Normally in all of us, we eat 20 mg of albumin a whole day. This is normal. This is because of our activities and exercise and all those things. But if this turns to 20 to becomes albuminuria. So it is at this stage of 20 to 300 mg per liter that we call it microalbuminuria, and it is a stage where nephropathy is still reversible. So in modern times, more on the everyone is focusing on the prevention rather than treatment. So this new updates is that microalbuminuria is the reversible stage of nephropathy.
मार्टी इंटरनेट डिस्टर्बेंस आपके एंड पे भी है? Okay, go ahead.
Yes. Am I clear?
ना बीच बीच में आवाज ठीक नहीं हो रही है, देख ले. I think ठीक, चलिए खत्म करिए.
ठीक है. Okay. So nephropathy is because of nephropathy we can detect and it will be wonderful if we detect it when it is reversible. So we need to see if the patient has microalbuminuria or not. And one more point I would like to add is 40% of end-stage renal diseases are because of diabetic nephropathy. So if we can make people aware of diabetic nephropathy, we can control 40% of renal dialysis patients today.
Yes. बिल्कुल ठीक.
And then one more point that hypertensive guidelines are more stricter in these patients, as we already discussed.
130 by 80.
Protein diet. Patient should be put on low protein diet. The reason is high protein diets accelerates glomerulosclerosis and even the progression of the disease. So low protein diet is a golden point here. So when people ask what should be our dietary control in these patients, then it should come to low protein diets. So next, coming to retinopathy. We already discussed about retinopathy, and glaucoma is also because of neoangiogenesis. And yes, so retinopathy is because of VEGF and TGF beta. So our treatments are based on them only, that we give drugs which are anti-VEGF and anti-TGF beta directly into the eye. And then we come to the cataract. Cataract is basically because there is extra glucose accumulation inside the lens of eye, and then it converts to sorbitol and it retains water basically. So swelling of the lens, and then ultimately leads cataract. Then yes, neuropathy. So a few points I would like to mention here, that neuropathy can be any type in diabetes. It can be involving one nerve, it can be involving many nerves, polyneuropathy, mononeuropathy, it can be involving autonomic nervous system. So mononeuropathy, the majorly involving muscles are my eye muscles. So patient can have just come with squint one day, or any diplopia or strabismus in one eye. Any extraocular muscle can get involved. Then my facial nerve also can involve. Then sciatica can be a symptom of neuropathy associated with diabetes. Many people complain of leg pain. Then polyneuropathy usually occurs in glove and stocking fashion. So gloves we wear only till palms, and stockings we wear till ankles. So basically these people also complain of tingling, numbness, paresthesia only in palms and soles. Then yes, the first symptom of polyneuropathy is loss of vibration sense. So we just take a tuning fork and we check these people's vibrations, and it mostly will be impaired. So we know that it is diabetic polyneuropathy. And yes, very interesting, this sign is called as wash basin sign. So whenever the person washes their face with cold water, they feel a loss of balance. So if any person comes with that has diabetes since 10 years or something, and then they say that whenever they wash their face in wash basin, they feel that they are losing their balance. So we can surely say that it is a sign of diabetic neuropathy.
All right.
And then last is autonomic neuropathy. Autonomic neuropathy is because of autonomic neuropathy. Again, autonomic nervous system can involve. So these people can have hypoglycemic problems, and because of autonomic neuropathy, and they also and in males, erectile dysfunction is very common due to diabetic neuropathy. And yes. And then coming to infections, obviously glucose is a growth substrate for bacteria also. So a lot of infections, like very common is diabetic foot, furuncles, ulcers in the back, UTI. Many times patient only presents with UTI first time for diabetes. And then gastroparesis. Yes, gastroparesis has this. Our gut is very rich in neurolepsis. So even though the gut can get affected that way, and it can lead to gastroparesis. For these patients, we prescribe them either continuous metoclopramide or even erythromycin has shown benefits in these things. And the last complications are joint problems. So this chiroarthropathy, I just found it very interesting. It is also called Namaste sign. So I put a picture here. So when patients just try to meet their hand, it looks like Namaste, and it is because of skin contractures and joint problems.
Okay.
So
आप ये
yes,
बताइए जो गट वाला जो बताया उस पे क्या ट्रीटमेंट क्या बताया आपने गट के लिए? Gastroparesis.
Gastroparesis, yes. I've not met any patients of gastroparesis, so I don't know what currently is like normally we prescribe. But the book says erythromycin and metoclopramide we should prescribe for gastroparesis. Metoclopramide are very good prokinetic agents.
ठीक है, done.
So thank you. We conclude today's session, and this was about complications of diabetes.
So now, thank you very much, Rahul. You have done made it very clear. But after a week, we should have a discussion on diabetes again. We can have all of us can definitely. You can ask us questions, and you can certify. You can sort out our all things. So we will read up and come, and then see what all our problems are get sorted out. We should be very clear. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
And now, what will be the next topic you are going to take?